All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out and making this inaugural festival a really big success. So to you, all of you, thank you so much, because hopefully they will do it again. This, she said 20 years, I've been actually a professional storyteller for 25 years. This is the only job I've ever had as a grown-up person. Since I graduated from Northwestern University, I've been traveling all over the world. And today, I'm going to tell you, for my part of this set, I got two stories for you. The first is a piece of personal narrative. In other words, it happened in my family. And the second is a folk tale. And I was not going to tell the exploding frog today, but I will. Guilted into something, right? But the first story is a not-so-scary ghost story for people who think they want ghost stories, but not really. And I started telling ghost stories like that because what I discovered is that you ask a group of children if they want to hear a ghost story, they go, oh yeah, make it really scary, oh yeah. And I learned if you tell them a ghost story, they're perfectly fine as long as they're all together with everybody else somewhere. And they're okay if the sun is out, they're okay at the dinner table. You put that same kid in the bed, 1 o'clock in the morning, parents come running in, what happened? They say, it was the storyteller. I told her I did not want to hear a scary story, and she told me one anyway, and I am scared, and I'm gonna sleep in your room. So I have a whole lot of stories that are not really scary. Tonight, however, if you come back for ghost stories, I have one that will take the hair off your head. But this one will not. I have in my life lived in 2 haunted houses. Not my choice. I don't think you asked to live in a haunted house. But the first one happened when I was a child. Now, my father is 6'4". He has black belts in judo, karate, hapkido, tenseido, and taekwondo. He knows how to use rifles and nunchucks, and the army thought it was a great idea to taught him how to use swords. He's just a really big, frightening person. He is the blackest human being I've ever seen in my life. He looks like midnight with eyeballs. He's incredibly handsome. He's incredibly charming. And he has this beautiful tenor voice. Unless he's angry, then he sounds like this. There are 7 children in my family. That's right, there are 7. And 3 of the children are adopted. They're half African-American, half Korean. We adopted them when I lived in Korea. And this story happens when I lived in Korea. We lived in a duplex. And so there's 2 houses, door, wall in the middle. And it was a haunted duplex. It was built by the Korean government for the Americans who were in the country. They built it on a battlefield because nobody else would live there. Americans, what do we know? Sure, build the house right there. So it was the RGH, the Resident Government Housing Area. And it was a kind of interesting thing. Korea in the 70s was, as a country, trying to sort of find its way into the 20th century. My dad always jokes, he said, they didn't have beasts of burden here. They didn't have the wheel. They went from, walking to driving. You can imagine what that causes. They have really horrible streets there. They're huge. They have no lanes. People just drive anywhere. If you hit someone in the car, you jump out of the car and have fist fights. And what wins the fist fight? I guess they're not at fault. I don't exactly know how that works. It's an interesting place. When I lived there in the 70s, there was this big road that you had to go down. And then when you got to this sort of intersection, sort of like a circular thing, there was a giant wall. And living in the middle of this wall was a tree. Because when the Chinese invade, they would cut all the trees down. So trees were sacred, especially if they were big. So instead of putting the road over here, they put the road straight at the tree, built a big wall, so you had to go around the wall and left the tree right there. I don't remember ever passing that tree without a car plastered up against that wall. And the grid, the electronic grid at this point in history was terrible. We were having brownouts and blackouts all the time. Well, we lived in this duplex. 7 children, my parents, and ours was the place everybody wanted to spend the night. And my mother kind of loved that. We were the family everyone wanted to hang out with. And come Friday night, half half the neighborhood would be in our house. And my mother would say, who would like to stay for dinner? All the hands would go up. And she would say, call your mothers. Do you want to stay? Mom, I want to stay. Come home. Come home. You can stay. You can stay. You can come home. Come home. Come home. You can stay. At any given time, there were 15 or 16 kids at my house. My mother cooked in giant industrial-sized pots. And she would just feed everyone until all the food was gone. Well, my dad, on top of being giant and scary, is also an amazing storyteller. And he would sit around and we'd all talk and laugh and listen. And one night, there was about 15 kids there. And after dinner, my mother said, who wants to go home? Nobody wanted to go home. Who wants to stay tonight? Call your mom. Can I stay over? Can I stay over? Come home, come home. You can stay, you can stay. So now there's only 12 of us there. And everyone's leaving, and my mother had fed everyone. There had been a whole lot of kids there. And she had scraped the bottom of the pots. And she was concerned she had not fed them enough, because we are a big Catholic family. Feeding people is an important thing. If you come from a big Jewish family, it's the same thing. If you come from an Italian family, it's the same thing. If you come from a Latvian family, it's the same thing. Your mother's eat, eat, eat. So, there was no food left. She thought, I think I'm going to make apple turnovers, because clearly they need to eat some more. So she made the apple turnovers, she put them in the oven, we were all sitting in the living room, lights go out. Ah! Children run to every corner of the room. My mother says, stop, we all stop. She goes, get back over, we get back, sit down. What's the problem? It's a haunted house. And it was a haunted house. We knew it was haunted. We knew the stories. They said if you stood outside our house, you could see a green light go past all the windows as if somebody was walking through the walls. We knew in our house that if you went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, a hand would come out of the toilet and grab your behind. We knew that if you sat really still in the house, you'd hear, Bloody Mary. We knew. My mother said, okay, don't worry about it. She got the candle. She started lighting candles, which just made it worse. There were flickering shadows all over the ceilings. And we started telling all the stories of why we thought this house was haunted. It had to do with battlefields and old Korean warriors and the Japanese coming through. It was amazing. We freaked ourselves out to the max. And then we thought, but my father is sitting in the chair. It'll be fine. We turn around. My father is gone. I do believe I mentioned he was gigantic. He had crept out of there some kind of way. Ah! We all ran to the corners of the room. My mother said, stop, we stopped. She said, get back here. We got back. Sit down. Whatever's in the house got him. And then we heard, someone's coming down the hall. We knew it was the green light, whatever it was. My father comes into the room wearing his gi, which is the martial arts outfit. My father is a black and red martial artist in most of these things, which means he's an instructor. He's wearing a white gi with the belt, the black and red belt, and he doesn't have any socks on. And so it looks like his eyeballs and the clothes are floating around all by themselves. And he's got a sword strapped on his side. My father says, sit in a circle. We sat in a circle. Make room for me. We made room for him. He sat down. He says, you've been telling stories about what's in this house. They're all true. He said, we know. He said, but I'm going to help you out. He unsheathed the samurai sword. He held it up, and the lights and the candles were glinting on it. And he said, when I was a young man, I saved the life of a samurai, and he had no son. And he gave me the sword, and he said that if you touched it, the protection of the samurai would come to you. And I have always had it, which is why you have all been safe while I'm in this house. Shh, he resheathed it. And he said, and now I'm going to pass it around the circle, and everybody touch the sword, and the samurai ancestors will also watch over you. And he started passing that sword around. Everybody was touching it, taking as many samurai ancestors as they could, and I was concerned because I was the last person in line. I was hoping they didn't take them all. The sword went around the circle, came to me. I held on to it. I was hoping I got at least one. My father took this, unsheathed the sword, he held it up, and he said, if you have answered our prayers, If the samurai are amongst us, let's have a sign. The buzzer on the stove went off in the kitchen. Children ran every direction. My mother said, stop, get back over, we got to sit down. The samurai ancestors set off the buzzer on the stove. My mother went in the kitchen, and she came out 5 minutes later with hot apple turnovers. Now, let me be clear here, we didn't know anything about residual heat at that point in our lives. We thought the ancestors had cooked the apple turnovers in a blackout. So my mother passed out the apple turnovers, and each of us sat there eating them, and we realized that the ancestors were watching over us. And so for the rest of the day, I extend my samurai protector. And at least from now until tomorrow this time, you are safe. And now we tell the ridiculous story. I always dedicate this story to teenagers. How many of you own a teenager? How many of you have yet to become a teenager? That means you're younger than teenage something. Got a few people in the audience like that. How many of you thankfully never have to do that again? Oh yeah. Teenagers have all sorts of weird problems. Many of them stand in one spot and are convinced the world is slowly revolving around their head. Everything is about them. Ah. Teenage boys develop the teenage boy problem. They reach up and latch the top of their heads. Open them up, reach inside, and grab their brains. Take the brain completely out of their head. Put it on the table. Close the head. Latch right back up. Walk around, do stuff without their brain. Teenage girls develop the teenage girl physical problem. Their eyes roll up into the top of their heads. Their tongues click, their lungs expand and contract, their hips go completely out of joint, their heads get loose on their necks. It looks like this. And they all want to be something else. If they're tall, they want to be short. If they're short, they want to be tall. If they're white, they want to be thin. If they're thin, they want to be wide. If they're straight, they want to be curly. If it's curly, they want to be straight. If it's red, they want to be blue. If it's blue, they want to be green. If it's green, they want to be black. If it's black, they want to be yellow. Some teenagers dye their hair every different color. They look like tropical fish. And it's easy to get them in trouble because all you have to do is tell them they're scared to do something and then they will do it. You're scared? I am not scared. You are scared? I am not scared. I'll prove it. I will put this pen in my head. Later in the emergency room, doctor says, how come you have this pen sticking out of your head? And they act like their head has been gone all day. And when it came back, there was a pen miraculously sticking out of them. How it got there? So this story is for anyone who's not been pleased with who they are. It's called The Exploding Frog. It is a participatory story. You'll see your part coming around. And I wish for you to join me with gusto. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, 3 little frogs were jumping around beside a pond. They were having a great time. They were eating bugs. They were singing. They're splashing around water. Having a great time. When out of the forest, there came an ox. Now, an ox is a great big animal, sort of like a cow, with great big horns and a ring in his nose. And he came down to the water to drink. The 3 little frogs had never seen an animal that big before in their entire lives. Wow! Wow! They jumped in the water with one of their eyes peeking out. Wow! The ox came down to the water. He began to drink. Wow! He's drinking a lot! When the ox was finished, he went back up into the trees. You guys can make that sound with me. Here we go. And the 3 little frogs jumped around and talked about how big he was. Did you see that? He was big. He was huge. There was a great big frog on the pond that day. He said, what are you 3 little frogs talking about? Come here. The three little frogs jumped over there. We just saw the biggest animal in the entire world. He was big. He was huge. One of them said, he was bigger than the oceans. One of them said, he was bigger than the mountains. And the little one said, yeah. He was bigger than the world. Not great big frogs. I'm the biggest animal on this pond. Was he as big as me? Little frog said, he was as big as you, he was bigger than you. He was bigger than the oceans. And he was bigger than the mountains. And the little one said, yeah. He was bigger than the world. Isn't that great big frog? I'm the biggest animal on this pond. I can get bigger still. Watch this. Well, was he as big as this? Little frog said, he was as big as he was bigger than that. If you remember how big he was, say it with me. He was bigger than the ocean. And he was bigger than the mountains. And the little one said, yeah. He was bigger than the world. Not great big frog said, I'm the biggest animal on this pond. And I can get bigger still. Watch this. Well, you see it's big as this. Little frog just looked at him. One of them said, you're a very big frog. This was not a frog. This was a monster. And he was big. He was huge. One last time, how big was he? He was bigger than the... And he was bigger than the... And the little one said, yeah. He was bigger than the world. And that great big frog said, I am the biggest animal on this pond. And I can get bigger still. Watch this. That's right. He exploded just like a balloon. And pieces of that frog right up in the air. And the little frog said, ew. Ew. He exploded. Just like a balloon. Wow. That was kind of exciting. They jumped in the water, throwing their eyes peeking out. Wow. When all the pieces settled, the 3 little frogs climbed out of the water, and all of them sat on one great big lily pad, and one of them said, well, he sure was a big frog. The little one said, uh-huh, but I don't think he was nearly as big as he wanted to be. As you go through your lives, just be yourselves. Usually, that's more than enough. My name is Donna Washington. I live in Durham, North Carolina, but I live 24 hours a day on the internet. I live at donnawashington.com. If you come visit me, I'm standing on the right side of your screen like this. Underneath me is a word, book hive, like a beehive. Click the book hive, it'll take you to a site. We'll see a picture of me, and underneath me, 15 stories. And if you click on the stories, you can download me onto your computer in a box, and I will tell you over an hour's worth of stories in streaming video online for free. You could take a piece of me home with you out in the booth. I have lots of little pieces floating around out there, as well as Tim Lowry, he has some pieces floating around out there. And at the very bottom of my website is a link to my blog, Language, Literacy, and Storytelling. Thank you guys so much for making this a great festival.